We're also joined by Fida Kishta, who is a freelance journalist living in Rafah and the Gaza Strip, coordinator for the International Solidarity Movement. Welcome to Democracy Now! Fida Kishta, describe what is happening in Rafah.
Well, at this moment, everything is calm, but yesterday was a massive attack to Rafah border. They attacked the border area with more than 11 rockets by the F-16s. And it was the only source for the Gazans to stay survivors by the food and the medicines, anything that they could bring through the tunnels. But now the only way for the Gazans to stay survive is destroyed. And yesterday morning, they attacked a pharmacy in Rafah near my house. It's just 60 meters away from my house. And they attacked the municipality, other normal buildings in Rafah too, which is just include families and civilians. I don't know what is the reason for doing that. As Dr. Musa said, they're attacking civilians. And it's true that the Israelis said that they attack, their attack is really, really massive, and it's really unbelievable that we can see in our eyes what's happening. It's too much. The hospitals, and even in Rafah, the biggest hospital, Abu Yusuf al-Najjar, cannot afford to have more than 20 injured, and they move the injured to Gaza City. And most of the people stay at home. Everything is closed. It's like a war. Nobody go out.
Fida Kishta, I'd like to ask you about the role of Egypt. There have been reports that the Egyptians along the border have prevented Palestinians from trying to escape the violence. Could you talk about that, or what you have, the reports you have heard there?
Well, when we heard the attack to the border, me and some friends from the ISM went there to observe in our eyes what's going on. And when we went there, we saw the Palestinians. Palestinians didn't try to escape. The Palestinians tried to show their anger to the Egyptian soldiers, why they didn't open just a part of these borders, all the crossings, to let the injured go out of Gaza to have treatment in Egypt. This is what the Palestinians tried to do. They didn't try to escape to Egypt. This is a false information. People went to the border with Egypt after the attacks by the F-16 happened, and they tried to show their anger for the Egyptian soldiers to let the injured go to Egypt for treatment. They didn't try to escape.
We're going to go to break, then come back to this conversation. We'll also be joined by Gideon Levy in Tel Aviv. He's with Haaretz, and Mustafa Barghouti. He's in Ramallah. Ali Abu Nima is also with us from Florida. He's the founder of Electronic Intifada. Then we'll hear an excerpt of the Nobel Prize acceptance speech of Harold Pinter, who died last week. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. Our guests on the phone, Fida Kishta, freelance journalist in Rafah, Dr. Musa El-Haddad. He's a retired physician speaking to us from Gaza City. Stay with us.
والذي يعرف رد ينحني ويصلي لإله في العيون العسلية بين رد وعيوني بندقية والذي يعرف رد ينحني ويصلي لإله في العيون العسلية وأنا قبلت ريتا عندما كانت صغيرة وأنا أذكر كيف التصقت بي وغطت سعيدي أحلى ضفيرة وأنا قبلت ريتا عندما كانت صغيرة وأنا أذكر كيف التصقت بي وغطت سعيدي أحلى ضفيرة وأنا أذكر.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We're speaking with guests in Rafah in Gaza City. Now we go to Tel Aviv with the Haaretz journalist Gideon Levy. He's on the phone with us. His latest piece is called The Neighborhood Bully Strikes Again. Welcome to Democracy Now! As you listen to Dr. Musa Al-Haddad, Fida Kishta speaking to us from Rafah, your thoughts in Tel Aviv and the response of the Israeli population to what's happening right now.
First of all, I feel horrible as an Israeli when I hear all those reports, when I watch all those horrible pictures. But unlikely me, I'm afraid that most of the Israelis are quite indifferent. They think that with a legitimate reason, the attacks on the southern parts of Israel, with a legitimate reason, Israel has the right to do everything. Unlikely them, I think that Israel crossed any line of humanity or morality or even legality. And I think what Israel is doing right now there is horrible and has no justification.
Do you think that there may be some decision by the Israeli government to act now, just as the Bush administration is leaving office and Barack Obama will be sworn in on January 20th, that there's a feeling maybe that the U.S. government at this point will not react in any negative way to this kind of action?
Look, you can find all kinds of justifications about the timing. There are also coming elections in Israel soon. But I must remind you that Israel went to a very similar war 2 years ago, a little bit more than 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when there were no elections and the President Bush was still in power and there was no election in the United States and not here. So, I mean, the Second Lebanese War. So I wouldn't count on, I mean, the situation is much more complex than this. There are political calculations, but I don't think that's the main thing. The main thing is that Israel is overreacting with overpower to a situation which has to have a solution, but not this kind of solution.
And how do you think, Gideon Levy, that this relates to the February 10th elections? Explain who is running and how this plays into this, the bombing of Gaza.
You mean in the domestic Israeli politics?
Yes. With Tzipi Livni, with Ehud Barak, with Benjamin Netanyahu.
There was a poll published yesterday in Israel which showed that within 2 days, Labor had gained 50% more in the polls. Namely because Ehud Barak, he is the man who is mostly identified with this operation. He is the Minister of Defense, as you know. So he might gain, and his party might gain out of it. But I wouldn't go so far and think that he did it only for the elections. It was in the back of his mind. If he gains, so Netanyahu loses, and maybe Kadima remains in the same place or gains also a little bit. But it's too early to judge because we don't know how will it end. You know, all those operations is in a very successful way, but then you don't know how will they end.